is The Young Piper. Some time ago in Tipperary, there was a hard-working couple who lived on the estate of the big house in that area. The husband, Joseph, worked on the farm for the landlord, and the mother, Bridget, ran the home and looked after the children. They had 5 beautiful sons, sturdy and golden-haired, who never gave their parents a moment's worry. Joseph and Bridget were the envy of all their neighbors, but no one begrudged them their good fortune because they were a kind and generous couple, always willing to help out those in need. After some years, the couple had a 6th child, yet another son, but this one was sickly and crotchety, and for a long time it was thought that he wouldn't live past his 1st birthday. He looked completely different from his healthy golden-haired brothers. His hair was jet black and matted, his teeth were crooked and yellow, and his limbs were thin. No matter how much he ate, he never seemed to grow. He was always whining and crying, and the only member of the family who had any patience with him at all was his mother Bridget, who loved him dearly. Whenever the neighbors came to visit, they had lots of advice for Bridget. "There's something not right with that child," they'd say. "Are you sure it's not a changeling?" But if Bridget had any thoughts like that, she kept them to herself, and soon the neighbors just accepted the strange child who was always hovering in the background, grunting instead of talking, greedily eating the cakes his mother put out for the visitors. In fact, he seemed to eat more than his 5 older brothers put together, although you'd never have known it to look at him. Things went on like that for a while until one day, when the child was about 5 years old, the blind piper was doing his rounds of the area, and he called on the household. He sat down beside the fire, and he had his bellow under his arms and the pipe in his mouth as soon as he'd wet his whistle with a cup of tea. He had no sooner begun to play a rousing tune than the child, who had been asleep in his little bed on the other side of the fire, woke up and began to kick his legs and wave his arms in time to the music. He reached out for the pipes, and Bridget asked the piper if he could borrow them. "You'll have to tell me how to strap them on," she said. But as soon as the child had hold of the pipes, he had himself fitted into the straps and was piping away as if his life depended on it. And it was no raucous caterwauling that he produced out of the pipes. It was as if he'd had 20 years' practice at them. The blind piper, of course, didn't realize that the musician was hardly 5 years old, and it wasn't until the astonished neighbors came crowding into the house that someone told him. "He must be a natural genius," he said. "I've been playing for 30 years, and I've never been as good as that." The boy played jigs and reels and ballads, and he soon had everyone dancing. The piper offered to take him on as an apprentice, but Bridget couldn't bear the thought of parting with her youngest son. When the time came for the piper to leave, she had to pull the pipes out of the boy's clutches, and he screamed and shouted until his father came home that evening. Bridget told Joseph what had happened, and they decided that if the boy had his own pipes, he'd always be able to make a living for himself. But pipes were not cheap, and the next fair day Joseph drove his prize pig to market and used the money he got for her to order a child-sized set of pipes. Well, about 2 weeks later the pipes arrived, and there had never been so much excitement in the household. The boy strapped himself into them and immediately started playing jigs and reels. After that, the house was never without the sound of music coming from it, flowing out of the windows and doors and up through the chimney. The young piper's fame spread far and wide, and it was soon said that there wasn't a piper in the whole county of Tipperary that was even half as good. The young girls and lads began to come to the family's house in the evenings, for there wasn't better dancing to be had in the 10 parishes around. Whatever tunes the little piper played seemed to put wings under the girls' feet, and the boys' steps were as quick as lightning. On and on they twirled and tapped, and many a match was made after an evening of dancing in Joseph and Bridget's kitchen. After a few months, the dancers began to notice that they were having a hard time keeping up with the music. Their feet became tangled up, and they were forever falling over and landing on their backs on the kitchen store. The girls and lads stopped coming to the house, but the piper kept on piping. He piped the cups off their hooks and the plates off the dresser, and soon the pots and pans were flying around the kitchen. The stools and chairs moved around the room as if they were bewitched, and before long everyone in the family had tripped over one at least once. The family's cat and dog, who had a long habit of sleeping in front of the fire, refused to come inside the house anymore, and slept outdoors in all weathers. Soon the neighbors stopped calling in, for they were likely to land on the floor when the chair they sat on was piped out from under them. And then the mischief seemed to spread further afield. The sheep on the hills got the staggers and died, and the cows in the milking sheds began to kick over the full buckets of milk. Barns began to collapse for no reason at all, and the crops in the fields died as soon as they started growing. It didn't take long for the neighbors to remember their old suspicions about the young piper, and soon the blame for all of the misfortune in the county was laid at Bridget and Joseph's door. One Sunday, Joseph's employer called in to see him after Mass. "I'm afraid I'll have to let you go," he said sadly. "You're a good worker, but this lad of yours is having a terrible effect on the neighborhood. I'll give you a good reference, but you're to be gone by the end of the week." This was terrible news, but Joseph had a decent reputation, and he'd soon found a good job on a farm in the next county, where people hadn't heard about his musical son. The family packed up all their belongings in their cart, said goodbye to their neighbors, and set off for their new home. The dog and cat refused to go and parked themselves on the doorstep of a more peaceful neighbor, who took them in out of pity for the animals and out of gratitude that the troublesome piper was going away. Bridget and Joseph's new home was just half a day's journey away, but it seemed to be a very long journey indeed. They had hidden the pipes, so their youngest child was shouting and roaring from the top of the cart until they were almost deafened. When everyone's nerves were completely frayed, Bridget gave in and handed over the pipes, hoping for a few minutes' peace. The child was just strapping them on when they came to a bridge over the river. "I'm not crossing that," he shouted. "You've played a mean trick bringing me here." And he struggled and shouted and jumped out of the cart with his pipes, and he jumped right into the river. The river was full and swirling, and there were currents and waves that would take a grown man under the water. "Oh, my poor boy, wept Bridget. He'll drown." Her 5 older boys went to the other side of the bridge, and after a couple of seconds they saw their brother coming through, sitting on the surface of the swirling water, piping away merrily. He was soon whirled away, and although his brothers ran along the bank, they soon lost sight of him when the water went round a bend. The young piper was never seen again in those parts. His mother was the only one who mourned his loss, and even she eventually agreed that her musical son had probably been a changeling after all. The family prospered in their new situation, and soon Joseph was able to buy a small farm. Although they enjoyed living in their peaceful home, the whole family agreed that it was sometimes just a bit too quiet. That was The Young Piper, a story from the book Old Irish Stories.